Today on Peaking, I'm joined by Bob Witkow, a Denver-based founder, cancer survivor, and the driving force behind Emet Surgical, a startup building software that's reshaping how surgeons operate. I actually met Bob at Denver Startup Week back in October of last year and was so excited to get him on the pod. He shares his story behind the pivot from hardware to software, how personal health challenges led to building a company focused on surgical precision and better patient outcomes. We dive into everything from building lean teams, recruiting the right advisors, navigating pitch competitions, global healthcare markets, and the constant push for funding. Episode is packed with insights on MedTech innovation, startup grit, and the mindset it takes to go from personal recovery to global impact. Bob's journey is as inspiring as it is instructive, especially for anyone working at the edge of healthcare or technology. Enjoy. Welcome to Peaking.
Well, thanks for having me, Wyatt.
Absolutely. So happy to have a Denver founder. That was the idea of Peaking, is to bring more Denver founders to the public. I do talk to people outside of Denver too, but definitely a happier moment when I get to talk to Denver founders. So how did you come to Denver? Have you been here your most of your life? Did you move here recently?
Actually, I want to tell you that it's nice to be on the same time zone because I've been on calls this morning, one with somebody in Shanghai and one with somebody in Tel Aviv. So nice to be on the same time zone, which is considering we have a incredible biomed and medtech ecosystem here in Colorado, that so much of our work is done outside. Now, I moved to Colorado 33 years ago. I had a successful exit as a sales manager with a startup. I was living in the West Coast, and it gave me enough funding to buy into a software company here. I told my wife we'd be in Denver for 2 years, and 33 years later, my wife and I are still together, and we are still in Denver.
Wow, beautiful. Yeah, that's life.
You know,
really
it's
cannot predict what's gonna happen. My favorite move so far, I was living in Silicon Valley, not loving it, and my now wife decided that her study abroad program for Cal Poly architecture, you have to go somewhere else to study. You have to. They force you out of San Luis Obispo, and they want you to see another perspective. And so she says, "I'm going to Munich," and I we're still dating at the time, and I'm like, I kind of want to go. Is that okay? Is this too early for that type of move? And she's like, I think it'd be fun. And so I sent her a one-way ticket receipt, and she goes, "Oh, okay."
yeah. Listen, you have to roll with the punches.
Yeah.
Is a good way to say it, and um, and embrace what life brings you.
Yes, certainly. That was just 1 year. We didn't stay for 33, but still probably, I don't want to say number one favorite year, because you can't rank things as number one. You want the best is yet to come, is the idea of this pod as well, peaking. But definitely one of the best years of my life. So much fun, and happy to be in Denver now too. We moved to Denver because of we felt it was most similar to Munich of the cities in the United States, just in terms of proximity to the mountains and a beer culture and a fun environment. And it's
Beer is
definitely not Munich, but it's got a lot to love.
Well, beer is always good, and Emet Surgical is headquartered here in Colorado. We do a lot of our work in Tel Aviv, Israel, and it's there's something to say for having experiences that are in different locations and learning from different people. And I think I'm an old guy running a startup, and those life experiences, whether they're different kinds of academia, different kinds of business, different locations, put a sort of a color around a business that is makes it broad, makes it interesting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think I learned more that year than any other. Just perspective wise, you really see things
Sure, exactly.
a larger lens. I've talked about it ad nauseum on the pod already, but So Emet Surgical, let's talk about it. You obviously talked about being a sales manager, working in software. Tell me about the origin story of Emet Surgical.
Sure. So I actually started my career. I'm a law school dropout. I went exactly one day. My two older brothers are lawyers, and I said, called them up, said, this is not for me. And they said, no, it is not. And I got lucky and I got into a management training program that the multinationals used to do, and they don't do anymore. And it's, I think, to the detriment. But when I got out of school, a great job was to go to a management training program at IBM or Xerox or J&J or one of the other companies. And literally after, in the few weeks following this decision not to go to law school or not to continue, I got a job in 3M's management training program. So I was based in Los Angeles, and I had the equivalent of a 2-year MBA inside of a big company. And then after that was made a sales manager in a group that had products for the medical world. The most interesting part of that to me was not the medical piece, but it was the data storage piece that 3M was big in. And they were big in floppy disks and things like that back in the day. And so the majority of my career was in data storage. And then in 2008, I was diagnosed with cancer. I had a heck of a time with it. Fortunately, knock on wood, I'm all good now. My co-founder also is a cancer survivor. And I think if I look at all my successes over the years and the things that I did, it was asking questions. Yeah, the success came from asking questions, not being, if you're a sales manager or salesman, you've got to be a little bit of a know-it-all, but you really do have to ask the questions and understand. Craig and I, my co-founder, went to our surgeons. Why are these things happening? And we got some pretty forthright answers and came up with a product idea. And then we founded Emet Surgical. Emet is the Hebrew word for truth. And the first product we came up with was a mechanical device, which we called True Margin. And it was to help surgeons and pathologists communicate with one another, because the surgeon's looking at, let's say, a tumor inside the body. Pathologist is looking at it outside the body, but we need to get them truly on the same page. And that was the genesis of Emet Surgical. We have evolved and pivoted since then, but that was how we got started.
Absolutely. And then in the intro, I talk a little bit more about the product. I definitely want to get into it more, but this is another product of founders I've talked to that seems inevitable. This will be a product that is used. This will be a software that is used.
Yes.
Whether or not yours is the one that makes it to market, we hope so, but it will happen. AI vision, computer vision for diagnosis, for even just an assistant. It doesn't need to replace the doctor. It will come to fruition. You will have these in every hospital. Whether it's a hardware device or a software or part of the robotic surgical arm.
So
go ahead.
I'm sorry. So we actually, this is sort of the pivot is the interesting piece here. We started building this device-based thing. Terrific idea. Couldn't raise any money on it, which is a minor problem if you're running a startup. But then we got to the point of getting into the FDA approval clearance cycle, and ran into challenges with sterilization. And it's a complicated process. And my light bulb moment is I wake up in the middle of the night and I think, what doesn't need to be sterilized? And I'm thinking, I had my first exit as CEO of a software company. You don't sterilize software. And if the FDA wants you to make a change in the middle to make it, it's a lot easier to rewrite software than to start, changing tooling at a factory. And within days, we had written our first patent application and had the wall's been repainted behind me, but the markers went on the wall and we started doing a system design. And that really was, you think about light bulb moment, we accomplish almost the same thing times 100 with software, what we were doing before with the hardware approach.
Did you have a working hardware product for a while?
I've got boxes of it.
Oh,
Yeah, no, we manufactured it. We had the designs done. The patents are done. Actually, I had a call earlier this morning from a startup company who I've kept in touch with, who's interested in licensing that from us. So it's interesting how things turn about. They think that they can take it to market, and they can take it into markets that can't afford a software solution. So if you think about tier two and tier three marketplaces, that our investors would really want us to go after U.S. and Western Europe, high value. That, as this fellow said, the cone of South America has a population of 450 million people. And that's a heck of a market for any medical device. And I couldn't argue with that.
So do you see that hardware starting at the hardware side as a mistake? You see it as sort of part of the process. How do you see
No,
that pre-pivot?
no, you know what? I don't think there's nothing in life to me that's a mistake if you learn from it. And so, I talked about this 3M experience, which was like an MBA. Um, and this was my education into medical device engineering, which I knew nothing about, into regulatory. My regulatory in the data storage world was dealing with the FCC, and which is just to give you a comparison. When Apple launches a new phone, they file the application with the FCC the morning they launch the phone. The FDA process can be 12 to 36 months. It's much more complicated. So for what we spent, sure, we didn't want to spend, you always look back and say, boy, what could I do with that money? But in reality, we got our money's worth in the learning process. And then that's guided us to, with the ESP system, I bet that we're developing this for 10% of the cost of what a J&J or a Medtronic or a Boston Scientific would spend doing that development.
Yeah, that is the beauty of
It's a big, and that's just from the learning experience.
So describe your building process for the software solution. Are you employing software engineers? Do you have a product manager? Are you the product manager? How does kind of the company run internally, and how did you decide to build it that way?
So Craig and I bootstrapped the company. And based on the fact that we're bootstrapping the company, we decided not to do a lot of hiring. So we are a small team of 4 full-time people. I'm essentially the product manager. The next funding round, we will hire a CTO and a chief operating officer, and we will build out the team. For now, we have a very strong medical advisory board, surgeons. We have a technical advisory board made up of the 2 leaders on that board. One has launched 6 companies in the VR image management type space. He's a PhD. And another person on that board was the founder of a surgical robot company. So you've got medical advisors, surgical advisors, and then I've got business advisors I've surrounded myself. So let's call it the advisory board. And then we've contracted out the regulatory, we've contracted out patents, and we've, to a certain degree, contracted out the software development. And that model has served us well in getting to where we are, where 3 weeks ago we demonstrated the core technology at a conference in Tel Aviv, and that core technology runs in real time. Examining the video stream from the surgical camera, from a robot or a scope, and identifying anomalies that are suggestive of cancer. And that's just a huge breakthrough. And you think we did it with 4 people and a bunch of advisors in 3 years, and of course the contractors and consultants that we hired outside. So that's been our model. We will transition as we start getting ready to file regulatory applications, go into clinical studies and so on. That we'll have to beef up the team internally on that.
Yeah, for the audience, surgeries are often done with a huge incision, and they peel back or pull back or hold back, clamp the skin and whatever else they need to move, and they do the work that they're trying to do. With robotics, surgery has become arthroscopic, is an often a term you hear, and they just make little incisions, and the robot can go in, and it has a camera, and it does exactly what you need to do. but the scope, the vision of the doctor is only what comes through that feed.
Yeah.
You're really not seeing much else.
So
And
we look at that, and you mentioned arthroscope. I've had my knees scoped, and that's the kind of scope they use on a knee or a shoulder. About 1985, just about 40 years ago, the first laparoscopic surgery was performed to remove a gallbladder. And a laparoscope is just a form of, just to make it more complicated, because everything in medicine is
anything
a form
endoscopic.
is a form of an endoscope. Okay. Previous, if you had a gallbladder surgery, you had about a 30 centimeter incision in across your belly, and that's what is that, 30
1
centimeter?
foot in freedom unit.
Yeah, and actually it's about I think 16 inches, 16, 17. You had a big, and the surgeon got their hands inside the patient, and they could physically palpate and feel textures. They could see, and they could even smell. And they used all their senses. So they had, let's call that the macro view. They had a big wide angle view. And the way the mind and research we did found that when you're looking at a big screen, so in the operating room, that's a 60-inch top of the line Samsung monitor, that you'd really like to have in your house for the Super Bowl game. But anyhow, it's in the operating room, sometimes a couple of those. And the surgeon is very, very narrowly focused on where the tools are. And the tools may be 2 centimeters apart, an inch apart, and they're not seeing what's in the surrounding area. So we say now the surgeons have transitioned from a macro view to a micro view. And boy, you don't want to have that 17-inch incision if you can help it. The healing is faster, the likelihood of an infection is dramatically reduced. But just like with everything else, when you have enhancements or improvements, some little things pop up. They think, oh, we should have thought about that. And one of those things is that it's just the way the mind and the eyes work together, that the surgeon is not seeing what's going on in the periphery. And that creates an opportunity. I wouldn't say it has created surgical problems, but some have not been solved. That's what creates the opportunity for us. And then the ESP system, which ESP stands for Enhanced Surgical Precision, although some surgeons call it extrasensory perception, because we're looking outside their frame of reference and highlighting, call them anomalies or serious conditions that we think they ought to take a look at. And we don't tell surgeons what to do either. We're just, highlighting it for them. They've gone through the training. They've got the experience. We're just highlighting what they might not have seen. And it's a lot like when you're driving a car and you turn on your turn signal and it goes beep, beep, beep because there's a kid in the next lane on a bicycle. And it's just telling you, hey, take a look out the window. It's not telling you not to it's not stopping you. I guess maybe some of the newer systems are. In our case, we're just giving that surgeon that little bit more information.
And how do you or did you train the model? Is it just loaded in millions of pictures?
Well, we started off, started with research, identify the problem, look for, this underlying problem, the macro versus the micro vision. And then we started from there, we went and did research and what are the sort of call them surgical problems and also the business case to solve those problems. And from then we went and we don't have any researchers on our team, but I worked in over the years, did a lot of patent licensing. So I went to some patent databases and I found a patent that the University of Minnesota was offering for license. And that patent it involves identification of cancerous tissues by means of 4 different algorithms that do vision analysis. So that's the foundation of the software, are these 4 algorithms. Then surgical video to train the system came from some hospitals we have developed relationships with, U.S. and in Israel. And the first database of cancerous tissue images to compare was an open source library from a university in Strasbourg, France. So a lot of this stuff is, we got very creative and tied it all together. And like I said, we demonstrated it in real time working 3 weeks ago.
And what's your, obviously looking to improve this probably always, but the hit rate or the success rate or the errors or hallucinations?
Yeah. Well, those are exactly the things that we're trying to work on. One of the things that we're dealing, so we and I'll give you an idea of we compete obviously against how many startups are out there and how many big companies. And our methodology is we call a photorealistic mapping. Photorealistic mapping is something that came out of Google in Google Earth. And without going into the deep technology, we're not using any outside tools or techniques. So the patient doesn't get an infusion of something that's going to light up the blood vessels, whatever. We are dealing right now with reflection off of the surgical instruments and trying to improve the algorithm so that those which would pop up and as a little note to the surgeon don't pop up that reflection. So that's where we're improving. And that has to be, I think that for the regulators, we have to be about 80% accurate. For the surgeons, we can't keep interrupting them with false negatives or false positives. That's key. In the second generation of the product, we want to take it from identifying anomalies suggestive of cancer to literally doing the diagnosis, which is called histology. It's what happens in the pathology lab when somebody's looking under a microscope. So we will need to either develop new algorithms or we'll license them. We're in license negotiations with a couple of hospitals right now who've developed this. And so it's always going to be an ongoing process, both on our end of trying to improve the algos, get more algos and test them and so on. And the machine learning piece, because that's one of the incredible benefits that we have with technology today, is that, and the way the system is designed, if we have 1,000 operating rooms with an installed base, everything learned from those 1,000 operating rooms in a day gets shot up to the cloud. And overnight gets parsed and checked and everything. And then we do a quick download down to the operating rooms where the systems are installed. And that the next day the system is that little bit better.
So in terms of the kind of curious on what happens in the operating room, you said interrupting. Obviously, surgeries have stages, where you're initially cutting through the viscera, and then you're working with the organ or the bone or whatever it is, and then you have to sew everything up, and there's stages.
Yeah.
And so is your system beeping as if real time? Oh, check that out, or would it be advantageous to at the end of each stage check back in with the system and see if it caught anything?
So the stages would be considered, let's say, the opening of the patient, the dissection, that's going through the fat and the fibrous tissue. And I'm speaking specifically of a gallbladder disease. And then there's achieving what the surgeon calls the critical view of safety, which is isolating anything that is that if they nick or touch in the gallbladder, the bile duct or the cystic artery would cause kind of devastating conflict. So they have to isolate those, make certain that they're not going to nudge them and so on. And then they can take out the gallbladder. Then they reverse the process and sew the patient up and leave. So our system is watching the entire time. And it is putting up a reminder in real time on the screen with a little actually colored square around this anomaly that we see. And the surgeon can address it in real time. Okay, let's say this is in the far left corner of the screen and they're focused on isolating the cystic artery, but we've seen something and it's flashing red. So they can leave that cystic artery for a minute, the isolation. They can move over and look and say, I'm going to come back to this. And they've got techniques. They can put a little surgical clip. They can tie a suture, saying as a reminder to come back. We don't interrupt the flow of the video. After a surgery, they could go back and look. Let's say if it's a very complicated case, pancreatic cancer, 6-7 hour laparoscopic surgery. The surgeon can review all of those things afterwards. It's highly likely, sadly, in a lot of these diseases where the patient has to have what's called a reoperation. And in those reoperations, they can then do some of the planning for that reoperation by doing, looking at the video. So actually, our system has only a few commands. And there's no keyboard or anything like that. It's a voice command from the surgeon, which is kind of images on, images off, just in case our images get in the way of what they're working on. So, I think that gives a good flavor of how it would be used.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of my audience is interested in the company building aspect as well. Obviously, I think it's super fun to talk about each individual product, but specific to your company building efforts, do you have a company building belief that others might disagree with?
Well, since we don't come from academia, and this is a very technical field, I can tell you just in the incubators that we've been in, we're one of the few companies that doesn't have a strong research background. And I've worked in organizations like that, and I consulted to them, and maybe it's because I'm a cancer survivor that I want to move at a faster pace, and we did research in a different way. So not that I don't appreciate research. I guess I'm just too impatient for it, and that's I get criticized for it occasionally, depending on if I'm pitching to a group of medical people versus a group of business people. The business guys say, "Oh, that's brilliant what you did," and the medical guys say, "Hold on, you don't have a PhD, you don't have anybody's a PhD, and you haven't done all this research." So that would be one piece of the philosophy. The other piece of the philosophy is since I worked in patent licensing. I licensed for a Silicon Valley company I was working for the underlying technology for the way flash memory is handled in a USB flash drive to the company who invented that USB flash drive. And they shaved years of R&D off of their timeline and cost for that R&D, and got to the market before others who were working on on portable data. And they got a multi-billion-dollar exit out of it. So I take that same approach. I'm looking for patents which are issued. I know what the claims are. I can build my brick wall of IP protection. And like I mentioned with this University of Minnesota patent, we can apply those algorithms. The day before I finished licensing the thing, we were already testing the algorithms. And so that's a different model, very different approach than a lot of companies which want to build up a lot of the core IP themselves. So we license this core IP, and then our IP is kind of the wrapper that makes the system out of it. And it's a different model. I especially like it because it's fast and I can budget. From my perspective, research projects. I had consulting clients back in the day who are started 15 years ago who are still researching today. And okay, that's all well and good, but that doesn't work for Bob Witkow.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And what are in terms of struggles and successes, recent wins? Obviously, you had that conference, which I think is super fun to talk about and was fun to follow on LinkedIn. What are some recent wins that you guys have?
So the struggle is always with a startup is and I say it this way, competing for funding, because every VC who's worth anything is getting 100 business plans on their desk every day. And so that's like the biggest challenge is attracting attention. But the wins, they say about startup CEOs that we go from suicidal to excited and exhilarated about every 20 minutes on a cycle like a metronome.
Yes.
We know it. Recent wins have been first of all the recognition. I got invited to participate in a tier 1 incubator last year, and from that tier 1 incubator we were the number 1 in our cohort. And actually, I'm having lunch today with a venture capitalist who saw me do a presentation from that. So the win multiplies itself. You want to be less suicidal than optimistic and enthusiastic, and so that opportunity. From that, we got invited to then a mentoring program, and that's where in day one, we were the only company that was not coming out of academia, and by the end of that program, which was 4 months, I got everybody else coming to me and asking, "Could you consult on this project for us? Because, we want to get out of the academia research cycle." So there's sort of validations as you go along the line, and then we were recognized by an organization called the Israel Innovation Authority, which is a lot like the National Science Foundation in the U.S. Does a lot of funding of startup. And they invited us to participate in this conference, which is called Biomed Israel 2025. And it gets about 5,000 people from all over the world, medical professional investment. And simultaneously, they asked us to apply for a pitch competition. So I got the invitation. Great, we're getting excited. We're going to demonstrate, and then we're getting closer to being able to really demonstrate something real. And then all of a sudden they made a telephone call, and Bob, you're one of 6 finalists to pitch on this competition. Now, we didn't win. We were one of the runners up. But I have to tell you, to be on the stage with people who are, I'm a business guy. I dropped out of law school, one day. These people are geniuses, and I get up on the stage and I'm thinking, man, that's validation. So these are all wins that add up to each other. And now, in the 3 weeks that I've been back from that conference, I had a VC call this morning. I have a VC call, a VC lunch, and we're getting attention. So, it's also like a tipping point moment for us.
How did you, or actually, who won? What was the product?
Oh my gosh, amazing product. It hit close to home. So my daughter was born, I want to say 6 or 7 weeks premature. Not so premature that she had to go to the ICU, but it's a pretty common problem. And you see, months and months of the child being in the ICU. And in our case, they say, well,
the NICU,
the NICU, correct. And they, there's a high likelihood, if you get pregnant again, that you will have another premature baby. And nobody wants to go through that twice. So this company invented a device, a physical device, to be used in women. It's easily implanted after a woman's had a premature baby, that in 98% of the cases, her next baby is full term, 9 months. Listen, we're doing great things, but if you think of the impact on families, we were shocked when the audience saw the results, and to be surrounded by people who are solving problems that are both costly to the healthcare system, but terribly impactful on the patient. That's really cool. That's a really cool place to be. When we did the USB software, the USB flash drive thing, did we save any lives? Nah, not really. But in this case, you're seeing some really amazing stuff. So that was the one that won.
The purpose and the gratification you get from your work day to day definitely changes depending on what you're building or the services you're providing.
Yeah, this is an impact company. We are an impact investment. There are certainly investors out there, and they're bloodthirsty, and the green American dollar is all they look for. And maybe my experience with cancer at Craig's has led us to let's find a balance.
Yeah, absolutely. What was that point where you knew you were ready?
I don't know if there's any point. I just try to make certain that every day we're trying to improve on what we're at, and the tipping point will appear. You've read Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point. It
might be.
Yeah, well, I think most of us have it. Over my management career, would have people who are struggling do every single day, at the end of the day, and with a pen and paper, write down 2 things you did well and 2 things you didn't do so well during the day. And at the end of the week, spend a half an hour, and it has to be done with pencil and paper because typing is it's too fast. Our minds move too fast. At the end of the week, sit down and spend a half an hour and see how you can build on those things you did well and how you can resolve those things you didn't do well. And I think, this is just unconscious that it's happening to me in the background, but I think about that. And so the tipping point, yeah, certainly there's a tipping point in the software development when we have the success, but you can't keep climbing Mount Everest and not stop and take, determine, hey, what have I done so far? How have I done it well? And how am I going to get to the top?
Did you give yourself a certain amount of runway, or did you give yourself a point, like if something happened, you would stop, or if something, were there checkpoints along the way that you passed, and how did you set those?
Well, I think we've gone way far beyond the point where we said we would stop if we ran out of money. And when we ran out of money from our first round, believe it or not, we started really accomplishing and making incredible achievements technically. And so that's kept us going to the point now where I think we will start receiving some more investment in the form of safe notes this month. And but yeah, sometimes you have to go out on a limb a little bit, and then we did.
Yeah, I mean, there's hundreds of stories about that, people being down to the last dollar and things turning around, and probably more where things didn't turn around, but you put it all out there and you do everything you can.
We do this because there's a passion, and that passion to do good and to make money for our investors is drove that. And I actually I had another call this morning with one of our medical advisors, who is her full-time job is the clinical director of an AI startup working in the ICU space, and they're closing the doors after burning through about $70 million, and she was just despondent. And it's but the VCs made a decision at that point. So fortunately, we are not so beholden to the investor. And actually, if we totally ran out of money today, I think there's an enterprise value that we could sell what we have, and walk away with enough money that Craig and I are back on our retirement paths. Let's put it that way. So
That's good.
yeah,
That's huge.
it is huge, but I think that these things happen. You have to be cognizant of it, and you just keep pushing forward.
Yeah,
Just
I mean, it's
push
part of the
forward.
process. It's part of the capitalism, the system.
Yeah, if you look at, I have some fun. Several times I've been invited to come into Denver high schools, and I do a little lecture on patents and creativity and thinking. And you look at guys who weren't inventors or were not educated, like Edison didn't know anything about physics, and he went through 100 light bulb designs before he found the right one. And what kept him going was wanting to be able to read at night. And you start looking at stories like that, and that's what I point out to the kids when I do my little lecture. And
I
most of them get
tried
it.
to read tried to read his biography, and man, it's just so long and so technical. He was just a workhorse. That's just all he ever did. He didn't sleep. He slept like
Yeah,
4 hours a night.
but if you look at other really interesting, because I get this question, you're not a researcher. It comes, okay, I get it. I'm not a PhD. And I say, Alexander Graham Bell, no background in hearing, invented the telephone. Edison, the Wright brothers, they ran a bike shop in Dayton, Ohio, and you start looking at all these other, Nikola Tesla. Tesla, we know Tesla, the name from the car, but also from electricity. He took a high school physics class. That was his education, but he had a hunger for learning and applying learning. And so we kind of think along the same lines here.
That's such an interesting thing people would be so nitpicky about nowadays, where the PhD is at your fingertips. Like anything anybody knows, you can look up.
Yeah,
And there's obviously an issue there when someone comes into the doctor's office and tells the doctor what they think they have, and it's like, okay, you're not a doctor, but dreamers and inventors are the ones that go way outside the lines. Scientists are rarely pushing the bounds. I would think, they're doing things within the rule book, within the rule set. I could be completely wrong there.
no, I don't think, but I think medicine is unique. Medicine is unique because it is, you look at the training process and so on for doctors, and we do hear it a lot. But when I interview people, when I'm whether it's a right now, we hire contractors and consultants primarily, but with our funding, we'll go out and start hiring. I'm going to look for people who not only think outside the box, build new boxes, and I want that creativity. I'd rather have to throw out 10 stupid ideas, or actually discuss 10 stupid ideas before throwing them out. And then a light bulb moment comes on that puts us, orders of magnitude above the competition, or something like that.
What is a trait you look for in every new hire you make? Obviously, out of the box thinking you listed there, someone that doesn't think so
Well,
conventionally. Anything else you're looking for?
yeah, it is the thinking and the process. So it's actually something I'm not good at. I'm a guy that bounces around. I can go from A to Z to Q to P and circular. But but in a lot of tasks in an organization, I look for process guys. I look for people who are not going to let stuff fall through the cracks. And then I look for people who um, really I sense will be take personal accountability to getting the job done. And then finally, and it's interesting because when I interview, I truly interview on these topics. I check references for, can the guy do a spreadsheet? That's easy enough. But I also then the last thing is the team fit. Is this person going to be a collaborator? Is this person going to make my team 1 + 1 = 3? And so that's been an approach I've taken for years in terms of interviewing and hiring.
How reliable do you think your methodology is?
Listen, and anybody any manager who hasn't made a mistake or two or three is lying to you. And I can think of, boy, back in the day in Los Angeles, I had a position. I was a sales manager at a computer company, and I hired a guy, and he just hit the cover off the ball as a salesman. And then my boss called me up about 4 months later, and he says, and I can't even remember the fellow's name. He says, I just fired him today. And I said, why? And he says, he was working for our competition at the same time. He had 2 company cars, 2 salaries, double the health insurance, and he was selling for our competition. Whoever could sell the product, so you make hiring mistakes, and you think, okay, well, that was one to learn from. Kind of oddball, but
Hiring is so funny. It's everyone has their kind of own strategy, and they all think they're making the right decision, of course. But it's one of those areas that it's just there's kind of no science to it yet. I think there are some people that have really proven to hire well. I think obviously for any listener that's listening, I'm an Elon fan. Like, he knows how to hire really strong people, because you don't build those companies by yourself.
I came close to going to work for the car company.
Yeah.
About over 15 years ago, I had a consulting business, and a fellow that I worked for in patent licensing had gone to work for Tesla as the general counsel, and he recruited me, and I went and interviewed and everything. And then funny thing is, about 3 weeks later, he decided he wasn't a good fit, and he left the company. So one of the things I think is really, really important still, and so frequently not done well, is checking references. Don't ask me for my references. I'm going to give you, my mother's going to tell you that I'm the greatest thing, of her 4 boys, the best boy of them all, right? So you really do need to look at the body of work and to get your references that way. And I think that if I was going to say to any hiring manager, don't neglect that portion of the process.
Yeah, that's been a key tenet of my recruiting from the day I started recruiting. It actually was required at my first recruiting company that I worked at, and you had to get 2 managerial references, and you attach those to the submittal when you sent someone over. And that's been something I always recommend to candidates to provide on sending me all their info. Is like, let's have these available when we need them, and they need to be able to speak to your most impressive projects. And I've conducted references where I run the job past the person, and the manager's just like, I don't don't know if that's the best job for that person, but I'm not gonna go into it.
So,
You know,
I'll
it's
give you an
kind of a
example.
slippery slope.
I'll give you an example, Wyatt. If I'm hiring a marketing person, I'm going to ask in the interview, well, what was the best product you launched and how'd you launch it? And then I'm going to go look at all that stuff. And online, fortunately, research is easy these days. And then I'm going to ask him who the agency he worked with that did the ads. And then I'm going to go, deeper and deeper. And the same thing if I'm hiring a salesperson, I'm going to, okay, my top customer was the Wells Fargo Bank. Well, who'd you deal with? And I'm going to call that person and I'm going to say, hey, tell me about your relationship with the XYZ company. And I'm going to wait for that person to say, I worked with Jim. That was the best salesman I ever heard. If I hear something like, yeah, they did okay. Sales guy never called me. He waited for me to do everything. That's you have to listen. You have to get creative that way. It's also, and you probably see it in your business. People never put their negatives on LinkedIn, on their LinkedIn profile, right? So you have to do that. And then when I do those reference checks and I talk to a human, I want to get the same kind of feeling that their relationships external to my company or to their company were going to be reflective on the relationships we're going to have inside.
Yeah, makes sense. What's next for Emet? You're obviously looking for a little bit of runway. Anything in terms of product development and building the company that's outside of the funding requirement?
So funding is number one. And any startup founder who tells you it's not number one is lying to you. And number two is in the second half of this year, we will begin our clinical studies. The clinical study data, the results go into our applications for the regulators. We will apply in the U.S. and the European Union and also in Israel, where we obviously get some grant funding. So we got to apply there, which is good. We have about a 12-month period where we're in sort of waiting land. We will do some R&D, but we will really work and refine our product launch methodologies and marketing, get that ready, because regulatory approval in the medical world is called a pre-marketing approval, and you can't market truly beyond what we're trying to do, really marketing to raise money, until we get those clearances. So when we hit the ground running, the day we get those clearances, I want to have that marketing program complete, tested, fail-safed, etc., so that we're not sitting around like so many companies go to launch a new product and it takes a year for them to get the first sale. So we got a lot of work ahead. We're going to be burning the midnight oil, but we have a good plan, and we know what we face, and it's exciting times. I got to tell you, it's to get from the point where the technology was proven 3 weeks ago to now seeing, hey, we really can go to market with a product in 19, 20 months. That's amazing.
What is your ICP? Are you selling to hospital administrators or surgeons
Yeah,
or
the
health systems?
we have an interesting model. Another Bob Witkow's breaking the rules model. Our competition, what we can tell, wants to sell their product as $1 million or so capital purchase, and that's about a 3-year budget cycle. These companies are, the J&Js of the world, and even some of the startups have a lot of money for marketing, and I'm happy to have them do marketing if they've got a 3-year sales cycle. We've priced our as we're doing our pro formas at $10,000 a year as a license fee per operating room. And that's an operating expense. The surgeon can see our product at a conference, can read the published literature and peer-reviewed journals and say, oh, what I saw is really bears, at the conference where you got a lot of salespeople, really bears out in practice. Surgeons are saying this thing works. I'm going to come home and I'm going to go see the CEO of my hospital and walk in and say, hey, I want to buy this thing. And I'm really hoping the CEO has seen the Johnson & Johnson salesperson. I don't mean to pick on J&J, but they are pricey, or Medtronic, or any of the others, and say, oh man, but $1 million and all this, and they don't want to deal with that kind of cycle. And just say, 10 grand, I'm going to call purchasing and tell them to expect you. and I'll call the IT guy to get you the server they need in the operating room and go to work. So that's our sort of go-to-market model. We are very narrowly focused on we call integrated healthcare providers. So those are in the U.S., these are Permanente, and the VA are integrated healthcare providers. They own the hospitals, they provide the insurance, they employ the doctors. They're very interested in cost savings, and then I think we've got a cost saving solution. If we can find a cancer early, we can treat it for $25,000 versus later on, maybe it's $250,000 cancer. Okay, so that's our model. And outside of the U.S., that is probably the most common model. It's the National Health Service in the UK. It's what we call the Kupat Holim in Israel. And I was in Austria a few weeks ago. Their healthcare system, exact same way. So it's that integrated model. And we think with this lower price license, and believe me, we make good money on that, or we'll make good money. And then knowing who to sell to, who's, for profit, I hate to say it, like sick people. They can charge more money. It was my personal experience with cancer starting in 2008. But that's the difference between the for-profit and not-for-profit. And so that's how we kind of came up with our idea of how we're going to go to market, how we're going to convince the surgeons. We'll demonstrate at conferences, and we will the doctors who are going to do our clinical studies in the second half of this year. The reason they're doing that is they've committed to write these peer-reviewed articles. So that's all ties together, and that makes, we think, for an effective go-to-market plan.
Last question: in the international markets, what's been your experience working internationally rather than just within the United States?
So personally, I have launched products in over 70 countries over my career, and so I'm very much an internationalist. I would tell you that we have one really unique advantage, is I can go into a university hospital in Vienna, Austria, or last year I walked into one in Buenos Aires, and find my way to the head of surgery's secretary and say, I'm here on vacation. I went to Austria for a wedding, not Austria, excuse me, Argentina. And I'm walking around town in Buenos Aires, and I see this hospital. I'm going to walk in and say hello, and okay. And this is what we're doing. Is Professor so-and-so available for 5 minutes? They don't see a CEO of a startup who's trying to solve a problem come in, and the first thing say is, here's my 30-second intro. Can you tell me what I need to do to fit into your market or your hospital or your patient care? And so that to me is just tremendous. It's tremendous for us on a learning perspective. We can make the product better. And I think when it go to sell the product, they're going to remember who it was that came in. And I remember this surgeon, and his English was very good, and my high school Spanish is very bad. But the conversation was along the lines of, well, definitely come back and see us when you're ready. And when I come back and say, I priced this so that you could treat your patients better, you don't think I'm going to get a sale? I think my chances are just better than somebody who's practiced in the U.S. and it's all about making money. And listen, I'm all about making money too. Don't get me wrong. I think I'm sort of a socialist capitalist in terms of the healthcare delivery. That I'm going to have a little bit, possibly a little more credibility, because I also went in and not telling but asking those questions. I think that's to our advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. The podcast is called Peaking, hitting peaks in your life, hopefully positives in both professional and personal life. What are some peaks that you've experienced throughout your journey?
Well, I just think that first of all, recovering from cancer, this is a really hard thing, and I think Craig would say that too. Although he's a bit of a hypochondriac, so he's a little more. If this makes it into the podcast, I'd love him to hear this piece of it. But if you've had cancer, you wake up every morning and you start checking your extremities. So that's the first thing. And then I think, the personal growth that I think I could have retired. I'm a senior citizen at this point. I guess I have Social Security card. So, or Medicare card. I guess I could say that just these achievements, both professionally and personally, have helped me grow. You're watching me on video right now. You see that I'm smiling the whole time. You don't see Bob Witkow with a down face very often, and so that's where I'm peaking.
Love that.
It,
That is why we do it.
yeah,
That's
and
good
you say
stuff.
why am I doing this? Yeah, for two reasons. Number one, I've got this personal reason with Craig, and number two is investors. It's interesting. We didn't talk about who the investors are, but in the first round, they were everyone had cancer experience in the family. And so, you start to put it all together, and we're making a community that is, and the appreciation that I get when I send out the update notes to the investors, and they look at the video and they go, oh my gosh, this is really, my money is making a difference. That's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Is there anywhere people can find you or more information about Emet?
So they can go to Emet Surgical, EMET, surgical.com. They can send an email to me, bob@emetsurgical.com, and they can find me on LinkedIn. Or they can just start waving a flag that says, hey, I got cancer in the family, and Bob, find us because we want to tell you our story, and if their story matches what we're trying to do, then we're going to, within reason, try to help them.
Absolutely. Awesome. So cool hearing your journey, hearing the story. Definitely rooting for you. And if there's any steps that you make where you want to come back on and announce, I'd be more than happy to hear about your progress.
I think the next one you'll hear about is when we get our regulatory clearances. And I think that would be a good time for us to talk again, because that piece of the journey is something I haven't experienced. It's going to be another learning experience. We will have staffed up by that point. And I think it might be interesting for your listeners.
Yes, sir. Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on, Bob.
Wyatt, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.